They made us laugh, they made us cry, and they redefined what it meant to grow older with grace, wit, and friendship. But while the Golden Girls gave us unforgettable stories of late-in-life love, what were the real romances like behind the scenes? Bea Arthur, Rue McClanahan, Betty White, and Estelle Getty lit up the screen, but off-camera, their personal love lives were often far more complicated. From quiet marriages and dramatic divorces to whirlwind affairs, widowhood, and solitude by choice, their journeys were messy, human, and deeply relatable. So, what happens when the women who portrayed love-hungry seniors, wisecracking widows, and starry-eyed flirts go home, take off the costume, and face real life? This is the story of the men they married, the love they lost, and the sisterhood that outlasted it all. Bea Arthur and Gene Saks. Bea Arthur was already a force of nature when she met director Gene Saks in the buzzing world of New York theater. He was a talented Broadway man with a sharp wit, and together they were two brains in perfect rhythm. Their bond wasn't just romantic, it was creative. They laughed hard, debated harder, and built a life filled with stage lights, scripts, and shared ambitions. In 1950, they married, and for a time, they thrived as equals in a world that rarely gave women like Bea that space. But as Bea's star rose, so did the tension at home. Gene, a director used to being in charge, found himself navigating life with a woman who would soon dominate television. Bea was fiery, stubborn, and fiercely proud. "I never wanted to be second," she once said, and neither did he. Their marriage, once based on mutual admiration, began to feel like a quiet competition. Roles shifted, and so did power. Still, they made it work. For nearly 3 decades. They adopted 2 sons and raised them with love, even as fame knocked constantly at the door. Bea tried to shield her family from the spotlight, but balancing motherhood with a growing career wasn't easy. Fame stretched the seams of their relationship. The intimacy faded, the conversations dulled, and over time, the bond that once lit up rooms quietly dimmed. In 1978, after 28 years, they divorced. Bea never expressed regret. "I don't think marriage was my strong suit," she said later. "But I loved, and I was loved. That counts for something." For Bea, it wasn't about fairy tales. It was about truth. And the truth was, even when the love story ended, she never stopped believing in the power of partnership, even if it couldn't last. After the marriage ended, Bea Arthur didn't chase love again, not publicly anyway. But what she did build was something even more powerful, a life on her own terms. Bea Arthur's quiet years. After her divorce from Gene Saks, Bea Arthur took a different path than most Hollywood stars. She didn't rush into another relationship. She didn't headline tabloids. Instead, she slipped into a quiet kind of independence. There were no flashy dates or public engagements. Bea seemed to decide that solitude wasn't loneliness. It was peace. "I enjoy my own company," she once told a reporter, and she meant it. Still, whispers followed her. Rumors circulated for years that Bea had quietly fallen in love again, this time possibly with a woman. Some claimed she shared more than friendship with a longtime confidant, but Bea never addressed it. She lived by an old-school Hollywood rule: protect the private. Her silence wasn't denial, it was dignity. She refused to let gossip shape her truth. "My personal life is my business," she once said, and she held that line until the end. What did matter to Bea were her friendships. Her closest bonds were often with women she respected deeply: co-stars, artists, even her fans. She remained close with her Golden Girls castmates, particularly Rue McClanahan. She also poured herself into her sons and took pride in raising them to be thoughtful, compassionate men. Love didn't disappear from her life. It just changed shape. More than anything, Bea redefined what aging looked like. She was sharp, unapologetic, and unfiltered. She challenged every idea of what a woman should be after 50. Her life after marriage wasn't marked by a second act in love, but by a first act in self-ownership. "You don't have to be married to be complete," she once said, and she proved it, every day. Where Bea found strength and independence, Rue McClanahan threw herself into love over and over again. For her, romance was a ride, and she never wanted to get off. Rue McClanahan's wild ride through 6 marriages. Rue McClanahan loved love, plain and simple. She called herself a romantic optimist, and she meant it. With 6 marriages under her belt, Rue lived like her Golden Girls character, Blanche Devereaux, unapologetically passionate, sometimes impulsive, and always ready to believe in the next great romance. "I'm not ashamed," she once said. "I just loved a lot of people, and I thought they loved me back." Each marriage brought something new, and something hard. Her first husbands were often controlling, jealous of her rising fame, or unprepared to share their lives with someone so spirited. But Rue didn't let heartbreak slow her down. If anything, she leaned into it. She picked herself up, put on lipstick, and kept believing. "You can't stop living because something ends," she said. "You start again. That's what life is." What made Rue special was how closely she lived her truth. Blanche wasn't an act. It was Rue amplified. She celebrated sexuality, aging, and flirtation without shame. Even in her 60s and 70s, she joked about admirers and dates. Her last husband, Morrow Wilson, seemed like he might be the real thing. "He's different," she said in one interview. "He listens." But over time, even that relationship unraveled. Rue never let heartbreak turn her bitter. Instead, she laughed through it. "Always the bride, never the wife," she joked during a press tour. Behind the humor, there was real wisdom. She knew love could hurt, but she also knew it was worth chasing. Her marriages may have ended, but her spirit never did. Rue lived for connection, and she never stopped trying to find it. But even Rue had to learn when to let go. In her final years, love looked different, less about the thrill and more about reflection. And what she left behind wasn't just a legacy of husbands, but a legacy of joy. Rue's final relationship and reflections. Rue McClanahan's 6th marriage to Morrow Wilson started with hope, but ended in silence. By the late 2000s, the couple had separated quietly. There was no tabloid drama, no public statements, just a noticeable absence. Rue, who once wore her romances like colorful scarves, simply stopped talking about it. When asked, she only said, "Sometimes things stop working, and that's okay." It was a rare moment of restraint from a woman who usually laid her heart bare. In her later interviews, Rue opened up about the emotional toll of chasing love. "It should be fun, exciting, not painful," she told one interviewer. "And I've had too much pain." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. She had spent decades believing in romance, but in her final chapter, she was more focused on peace. She knew by then that love wasn't always worth the fight. Still, Rue never gave up on the magic of connection. Even in her 70s, she joked about dating and maintained a lively, flirtatious spirit. Fans would see her at appearances or book signings, Sparkling eyes, bright lipstick, ready with a story. That spark never left her. "You don't stop being a woman because of age," she once said. "You just get better at knowing what you want." That was the heart of Rue, always evolving, never dimming. When she passed in 2010, she was single, but far from alone. Her son, her dearest friends, and her fans were her greatest loves, and she loved being alive. For Rue, love wasn't just about romance. It was about presence. She found it in laughter, in champagne toasts, in applause. "My real love," she once said, "might have been life itself." Where Rue found love in the world, Betty White found it in one man. She didn't need 6 husbands, because once she met Alan Ludden, she never looked back. Betty White and Alan Ludden. Betty White met game show host Alan Ludden on the set of Password in the early 1960s. He was quick-witted, warm, and persistent. Betty, twice divorced, was hesitant. She had been burned before, but Alan wouldn't give up. He proposed several times. Betty kept turning him down, until one day she didn't. "I wasted a whole year saying no," she later said, "but it was the best decision I ever made." They married in 1963 and built a love story that was as real as it gets. No scandals, no tabloid headlines, just 2 people who adored each other. They shared everything: laughter, crossword puzzles, and deep respect. They were intellectual equals and emotional partners. Betty called Alan the kindest man I ever knew. Their marriage lasted 18 years, filled with joy and comfort. It was the kind of love that didn't just warm the heart, it healed it. But in 1981, that story ended too soon. Alan died of stomach cancer, and Betty was shattered. She never remarried. "When you've had the best," she said, "who needs the rest?" She wore his wedding ring for the rest of her life. Even decades later, she'd tear up when his name came up in interviews. For Betty, Alan wasn't just a husband. He was home. Their love became legend. In a town where relationships often fade fast, theirs endured, even beyond death. "We didn't take each other for granted," she once said. "We were grateful every day." In her words, in her smile, and even in her silence, it was clear: Alan Ludden was Betty's forever. And even after Alan was gone, Betty carried their love like a light, guiding her through the next 4 decades of fame, grief, and joy. Betty White's widowhood. After Alan Ludden's death, Betty didn't disappear into grief. She poured herself into her work: acting, advocacy, comedy. But behind that dazzling wit was a woman still deeply in love with a man who was no longer there. "I work to stay busy," she admitted, "but there's not a day I don't miss him." Her energy became her shield. Her laughter became her armor. She spoke of Alan often, with humor and warmth. She shared stories of their silly jokes, their quiet mornings, their endless games of Scrabble. She never let his memory fade. "He made me better," she once said. "He made everything better." There was no drama in her widowhood, just a quiet, loyal love that lived on in her every word. Betty never dated again. Not once. Not even a fling. And when asked why, her answer was always the same: "I had the best. I'm not looking to replace that." That kind of love, the kind that doesn't die, was rare. And it defined her just as much as her comedy did. When Betty White passed in December 2021, just weeks shy of her 100th birthday, fans didn't just mourn her, they imagined her being reunited with Alan. That idea brought comfort to millions. And maybe, just maybe, That's how Betty would have wanted it. Not the end of a life, but the continuation of a love story. Betty found forever love. But not every golden girl had that chance. For Estelle Getty, her story was quieter, but no less powerful. Estelle Getty's quiet marriage and fierce loyalty. Before the world knew her as Sophia Petrillo, Estelle Getty was Estelle Scher, a loving wife married to Arthur Gettleman. They tied the knot in 1947, long before fame came calling. Their marriage lasted over 50 years, a rare Hollywood anomaly. But it wasn't traditional in every way. Arthur stayed in New York, running the family business. Estelle chased her dream in Los Angeles. Living apart wasn't about distance in love, it was about support. Arthur believed in Estelle and never held her back. She lived modestly while auditioning endlessly, working odd jobs and pushing forward. When the Golden Girls finally happened, Estelle was already in her 60s. Success came late, but when it did, she made sure Arthur felt every part of it. "He was my base," she once said. "He let me fly." Still, the long-distance life wasn't without strain. Estelle often expressed the pull between two lives, one as a star and one as a wife. She visited Arthur when she could, kept in touch constantly, and made their relationship work through sheer loyalty. After his death in 2004, she never remarried. "He was enough," she said simply. That quiet sentence held decades of devotion. Estelle never flaunted her love story, but that didn't make it any less powerful. It wasn't the kind of romance that made headlines, it was the kind that held steady in the background. The kind that outlasted the flashbulbs. In a career full of late starts and sudden fame, her marriage was the one thing that had always been there. Solid, steady, hers. But fame, especially when it comes late, can be complicated. For Estelle, the spotlight didn't just illuminate her, it also cast shadows. And as her star rose, her personal struggles quietly followed. Fame in late life. Estelle Getty's rise to fame was the definition of a late bloom. She was in her early 60s when The Golden Girls premiered in 1985. The role of Sophia made her a household name overnight, but it came with pressure. Estelle battled severe stage fright from the beginning. On set, she often relied on cue cards to get through her lines. "I was terrified they'd fire me," she once admitted. As the show continued, so did her struggle. While her co-stars flourished in the spotlight, Estelle quietly wrestled with anxiety and memory lapses. In the early 2000s, signs of dementia appeared. She began forgetting lines entirely, missing appointments, and eventually withdrew from acting altogether. By the time her condition was diagnosed as Lewy body dementia, it was already advanced. Even more heartbreaking was the feeling of being forgotten. Friends said Estelle was crushed when the phone stopped ringing, when old colleagues stopped calling, and Hollywood moved on. Despite a lifetime of hard work, she felt left behind. She didn't want pity, one family member said. She just wanted to be remembered. But Estelle was never truly alone. Her family stayed close, and fans never stopped loving her. Co-stars like Bea Arthur and Betty White often spoke of her with deep affection. When Estelle passed in 2008, tributes poured in from across the globe. Her time in the spotlight may have been brief, but her impact was lasting. And behind the laughter, behind Sophia's sass, was a woman who gave everything just to be seen. Together, the Golden Girls played soulmates on screen. But in real life, their love lives were far messier. What they had with each other, though, might have been the truest romance of all. The Girls and Their Men. On The Golden Girls, they joked about dating, marriage, and wild nights. But behind the scenes, love wasn't always kind. Only one of the four, Betty White, found lasting romantic happiness. The others, like Bea, Rue, and Estelle, had more complicated paths. Their on-screen confidence in love often masked off-screen disappointment, divorce, and deep emotional scars. For Bea, romance ended with Jean Sachs. She never married again and openly questioned whether love was ever the right fit for her life. Rue chased it constantly, married 6 times, and always ready to believe in the next big thing. Estelle lived a quiet, unconventional love story that most never even knew. "It's funny," Rue once said. "We played women who were always looking for love. And most of us were. In real life, too." What made their stories so special wasn't perfection. It was honesty. These women embodied the real struggle of finding love after 50. They portrayed the heartbreak of widowhood, the loneliness of singledom, and the hope that love might still be waiting. On screen, they laughed through it all. Off screen, they lived every beat of it. And maybe that's why the show resonated so deeply. Viewers didn't just see 4 actresses, they saw themselves. Women who'd loved and lost, who found friendship when romance failed, and who kept going no matter what. The girls didn't just make people laugh, they made them feel seen. Their real lives weren't fairy tales, but they were full of truth, strength, and laughter. And coming up next, we'll see how grief, humor, and resilience shaped the next chapters of these extraordinary women. Shared heartaches. The Golden Girls made aging look fearless, but in their real lives, aging often meant grieving in silence. Betty White and Estelle Getty both lost the loves of their lives and never remarried. For Betty, Alan Ludden's death left a lifelong ache. For Estelle, the death of her husband Arthur ended a quiet but powerful love story that had anchored her for decades. Bea Arthur and Rue McClanahan took a different path. Both divorced and never remarried, they wore their scars with humor and grit. Bea kept her heart guarded, while Rue stayed open, even when it hurt. "I've had enough husbands to learn how to live alone," Rue once joked. Behind the punchlines, though, was something deeper. Resilience, born from disappointment. Each woman grieved in her own way. Betty found purpose in work. Estelle withdrew, Bea built emotional walls, and Rue looked for connection wherever she could. They coped the way so many older women do, quietly, with courage, and without expecting the world to understand. But they never stopped feeling. "Just because we're older," Bea once said, "doesn't mean we stop wanting love." What's remarkable is how real these stories felt to the audience. Because they were real. These women weren't just acting, they were living out truths that millions of fans connected to. The fear of being alone, the pain of starting over, and the strength it takes to keep believing in love after it's let you down. But where pain lingered, so did laughter. Because if there's one thing all 4 women knew how to do, it was to turn heartache into punchlines and grief into something worth laughing about. The role of humor in surviving love lost. The Golden Girls didn't just make people laugh, they gave them permission to laugh through pain. And no one knew how to use humor as a shield better than Bea, Rue, Betty, and Estelle. Their characters delivered razor-sharp zingers and heartwarming jokes, but often those lines came from very real places. Off-camera, humor was a lifeline. For Rue, sass was a survival skill. She flirted, teased, and made fun of her own romantic missteps. "Why cry about it when you can turn it into a good story?" she'd say. Bea, on the other hand, used sarcasm like armor. Beneath that tough exterior was a woman who had loved deeply and lost. Her dry wit kept people at a distance, but also let her stay in control of her emotions. Betty White's sweetness made it easy to forget her sorrow, but even she used comedy as a coping tool. After Alan's death, she buried herself in sitcoms and game shows, not just for the audience, but for herself. She found healing in laughter, saying, "You can't be mad at life when you're busy making people smile." Even Estelle, though plagued by anxiety in later years, found strength in her character Sophia's outrageous one-liners. Laughter became her way of connecting when words were hard to find. It was this unique ability to turn pain into comedy that defined these women. They didn't just act funny, they survived funny. And in doing so, they made millions feel a little less alone. But behind the jokes and jabs were hard-earned truths. Each woman had lived through her share of heartbreak, and from those experiences came powerful lessons that reached far beyond the screen. Lessons from each woman's journey. Bea Arthur taught us that independence is a form of love, especially self-love. She never needed to be someone's wife to feel whole. Her life showed that solitude can be chosen, not forced. "I'm not lonely," she said in an interview. "I just don't need noise." She redefined aging with pride, intellect, and a quiet strength that still inspires. Rue McClanahan showed us what it means to stay hopeful. Even after failed marriages, she never stopped believing in romance. "You get knocked down, you get up in a new outfit," she laughed. Rue reminded the world that you can be sexy, visible, and vibrant, no matter your age or your relationship status. Betty White reminded us that love doesn't end with loss. Her devotion to Alan Ludden became a timeless symbol of loyalty. But she also showed that it's okay to keep living fully even when your heart is broken. "He'd want me to keep laughing," she said. And so she did. Estelle Getty taught grace. She was never flashy or dramatic, but her loyalty to her husband, her courage in the face of illness, and her humility through fame showed the quiet power of a committed life. "She didn't ask for applause," Bea once said. "She just did the work." Her story proves that strength doesn't always roar. It often whispers. Love didn't always look like happily ever after for the Golden Girls, but what they left behind were lessons in resilience, humor, and the deep, quiet beauty of simply carrying on. Behind closed doors. Fame brought the Golden Girls into millions of homes, but behind closed doors, it often cost them the very thing they portrayed on screen: real, lasting love. For all their success, romance didn't come easy. These women were always working, memorizing lines, shooting episodes, promoting shows, and that kind of pace didn't leave much room for relationships. "You can't build a marriage on empty calendars," Rue once joked. As older women in Hollywood, they were often underestimated, typecast as mothers, grandmothers, or comic relief. Off-screen, the dating pool thinned. Men were intimidated or uninterested in dating women who were independent, famous, and in their 60s. Bea once said bluntly, "Men don't want strong women. They say they do, but they don't." That kind of truth hurt, but it didn't surprise her anymore. The media made things harder. Every appearance, every absence, every red carpet companion sparked speculation. Personal lives became public property, and even the smallest relationship moments were magnified or misunderstood. That kind of scrutiny can smother even the strongest love. For Bea and Rue especially, it meant learning to protect their privacy, even if it meant walking away. Ironically, the success that made them stars also left them emotionally isolated. Fame gave them everything: admiration, influence, legacy, but rarely stability and love. And that's the part fans didn't always see. Beneath the applause were women coming home to silence or to phone calls instead of partners. They loved their work, but it didn't always love them back in the ways that mattered most. But when romantic love faltered, another kind of love held them together, a bond that may have outlasted any marriage. Because through all the highs and heartbreaks, they had each other. Sisterhood. Over soulmates. The friendships formed on the Golden Girls weren't perfect, but they were real. These women came from different backgrounds, different personalities, and different approaches to life. Bea could be intense and guarded. Rue was flirty and wide open. Betty was endlessly sunny. Estelle was quiet, but razor sharp. And over the years, through laughter and friction, they formed something deeper than co-star camaraderie. There were clashes, especially between Bea and Betty, who famously had creative differences early on. But time softened those edges. They learned to trust each other, and even more, to rely on each other. Through divorces, illness, loss, and aging, their bond held. When one was struggling, the others stepped in. On set, when Estelle had memory issues, Betty and Rue helped her through scenes without hesitation. That wasn't just professionalism, it was love. In their final years, that sisterhood became even more precious. Rue and Betty stayed especially close, calling often and visiting when they could. Bea, though more private, never stopped defending her co-stars in the press. And after Estelle passed, each woman paid tribute, not just to a castmate, but to a friend. "We were a family," Betty once said. Maybe not perfect, but real. It's easy to call their bond TV magic, but in truth, it was something bigger. It was a rare, true sisterhood that outlasted scripts, studios, and ratings. When romantic love failed, their love for one another endured. And in a world that often discards older women, they held each other up with dignity and devotion. In the end, their greatest love story might have been with each other. They played lovers, widows, and flirts, but the real love stories of the Golden Girls were more fragile, more flawed, and ultimately more honest. Bea found strength in solitude. Rue never stopped chasing romance. Estelle stayed quietly devoted. And Betty? She found a once-in-a-lifetime love and never let it go. Their marriages didn't always last. Their hearts were broken more than once. But through all the personal storms, what endured was their resilience and their connection to each other. Because while the world watched four women grow old with humor and heart, behind the scenes, they were living every beat of those stories themselves. Their real-life partners may have come and gone, but the love that lasted was the love they gave to their fans, their families, and to each other. In the end, they weren't just Golden Girls. They were golden-hearted women who lived, lost, and kept on loving anyway.